Hello again. We stand at a crossroads every time we consume media online. We are broadly given the choices to accept, reject, or disregard the opinions and worldviews we are exposed to during our media consumption. What drives the choices individuals make in these domains has largely been ideology, one that posits certain doctrines and renounces others. This makes the choice easy. By virtue of one's belief in their corresponding ideology, they can cling to it in order for it to dictate what is accepted and what is not under the judgment of the ideology itself. This phenomena will be what it is. Somebody making a video on it will not deter individuals from behaving this way, because the dogmatic group-thinking drive has always been present in us, and it takes a lot more than just a well-reasoned argument to deter people from thinking in this way. I personally don't think it is as useful or productive as assessing ideas individually of their own merit, but what can you do? What I believe is more pressing is the parsing of this information for people who lack these kinds of belief structures to do the work for them. Essentially, the question is asked, if I don't have an underlying construct to determine whether or not I should accept and apply a certain idea or frame, how should I go about determining the ideas I put stock in, or believe, or advise to others, etc.? Here's where the title comes in. A proposed method that can be used, not just on its own, but in conjunction with others, to determine what ideas you move forward with and what ideas you leave behind. Editing it to be more appropriate yields, you shall know the quality of the idea by the results it garners, which is the framework I present to you that I've found is effective at sifting through ideas. Not everyone has strong belief in conventional belief structures, and not everyone can believe strongly in them, even if they wanted to. That is the encampment of which I am a part, and as much as I may personally believe it to be effective for people to follow similar and useful belief structures, I understand that modern societies, right now, are pushing people away from them, to conform to a hyper-individualist standard that does very little any favors. And because of this, a void is formed that was once filled by religious and cultural constructs. These gaps are troubling. Belief structures have filled so many roles that their absence creates a vacuum of sorts that is eager to be filled up by whatever an individual seeks to attach themselves to. This was the thesis of the earlier identity crisis videos that I made a couple months ago, that in the absence of something, other things will take their place, and in recent times it has been very destructive and polarizing ideologies that have taken these places. They serve the interests of no one, and you should know them well. But back to the point at hand. This framework is another thing that can fill the role that was filled long ago, and hopefully it's one that doesn't carry with it as much destructive and divisive baggage as some of its alternatives. So, how do we apply this in practice? I do it all the time, and it's by playing an idea out and observing the results. So you could ask, what are the immediate consequences for the first step? For an ideology like Stoicism, as an example, which I've covered in the past, an immediate consequence would likely be of an empowering nature to the individual applying it, because full acceptance of the idea seems to suggest that an individual is the greatest arbiter of their outcomes, and that exterior circumstances are, because of their uncontrollable nature, less relevant to the individual and their success. This makes Stoicism sound good. It teaches individuals that what they need to focus on and what is of the greatest concern is the things they can control rather than those that they can't. This makes it sound good. Too good. Next, I would ask, what are some potential side effects of the ideology in general? Ideology or concept, we'll say. What are the positives? What are the negatives? I, for one, in this example, can foresee a level of emotional stability being developed over the long term, as an individual becomes more adept at self-control. But this also might lead into callousness and apathy as the resting emotional state becomes too controlled and restricted. You might even get some self-centeredness, as individuals shift their focus from others and their perspectives to their own, the one they have control over, right? You shift towards you and what is relevant to you rather than the greater world, because the greater world, it is large and and maybe your effect, what you do can impact it, but it's ultimately not malleable, not permeable to one person. Now there's some contention though. The idea is challenged, giving its positives and negatives, and that's actually productive. We don't want dogma or blind adherence. If you trust something, it shouldn't be a naive, foolish trust. You should have confidence in the decision you've made. But there's more to it. We still haven't come to a conclusion, so we have to keep going. How has the idea worked out in practice for others who tried it? Well? Poorly? Is it easy to apply, or does it take time to understand before it becomes useful? And what kinds of outcomes came as a consequence of adopting these mindsets or frameworks? In our example, How easy is Stoicism to apply, and how well has it worked for people? I'd say it works pretty effectively when used to combat a circle of concern that's too large. Caring and putting mental stock into things far too out of your circle of influence is bound to cause some friction. The juice just isn't worth the squeeze. It's as little as a mental reframe, which doesn't lend itself to being particularly difficult in practice, although, there's still the effect. Individuals will still become more efficient in the frame as they practice. And onto outcomes. The fruits born of the tree. The last step is to assess the outcomes that came as a result of the idea in question, and ask yourself, is the totality of what this idea is and has done suitable for me, for my needs, ambitions, or lifestyle, for who I want to be? Taking the rational stance excludes many ideas from use. People say all sorts of shit, but the second comes under any regimented or structured scrutiny, it all falls apart. And maybe that's okay. Perhaps some things aren't meant to be. I know the forces of evolution, as it were, have weeded many people and ideas out. And as unfortunate as it may be to lose so much, the wheat must one day be separated from the chaff. Maybe some things do have more value to others, at least in the context of the thing in question's ability to self-preserve. There's a lot of self-selecting ideologies out there that work against their own interests, technically. I know, in modern times, antinatalism, for one, is one such ideology that selects against its own survival. Because ideologies tend to be passed down across generations, within familial lines rather than across different unrelated people. But back to the point. With the last step, you've essentially gathered the information available to you and are free to make your own judgment on the matter and its relevance or utility towards your life. I think it solves our aforementioned problem because I think indecisiveness of this nature, of the nature of not being able to choose discern in specific ideas' value, comes from a lack of information primarily. If you know X outcome is more beneficial to you than Y, then it's a no-brainer to make that choice. But if this direct comparison is hidden between layers of nuance, applicability, and chance, then you might see how some people aren't willing to take the leap of faith required to trust the idea fully. The direct benefit isn't as easy to assess as we would like it to be. So, that's the frame. If you really want to get meta with it, you can apply the frame to itself in its outcomes and people as collections of individual ideas. With the frame itself, you're likely to see positive outputs, so outputs of the frame, like the type of outputs the types of outputs that it outputs, right? So it's its result. You're likely to see positive ones that strongly bias practical ideologies, because impractical ones tend to produce crap outcomes that are later analyzed and become data points for the ideology itself. Whether or not that's something you are concerned with is, again, up to you. Just know it will 100% bias against ideas that are harder to execute or those that are less impactful in their application, because completely bungling the application of an idea will often lead to the outcome being completely off, and this ideology specifically selects against outcomes that are off. Now, using the frame on people themselves, their outcomes generally, not always, but generally, are a consequence of the belief structures that they both believe themselves to follow and the ones they actually do. So what they get out of life, maybe what they're afflicted with, the challenges they face, and what they accomplish might all be consequences of their belief systems. Of course, there are things outside of our control that occur to us. That's why I'm generalizing here, because there is both a correlation factor of the belief system and its effects alongside random chance. But, for simplicity's sake, we are focusing on the effects of the belief system. Essentially, though, following this line of reason, you can conclude that by some margin, a belief system will direct an outcome, and the overarching question posed that only you can answer for yourself becomes, do I want this outcome? Do I want to follow this belief structure that led to this outcome? And again, that's your choice, not mine. I'm here to give and explain some of the tools involved with simplifying the decision because we have an overabundance of extra factors and fluff surrounding the ideas we're presented. We are told that the ideas are X and Y, that they are morally good ideologies to hold, maybe. Maybe they're productive ideas, supposedly at least. Maybe they're beneficial for society, socially just, etc. But beyond the curtains of the stories people tell of their beliefs lies the cold, hard truth of the matter. Now, what you do with the truth is up to you. You can ignore it, you can hide from it, You can accept it at face value. There's so many things you can do. But nonetheless, it will still exist as an entity of its own, entirely capable of defending itself in the hopes that one day it will be found and understood so that it has its righteous effect on the way things are perceived, right? The truth will inform decision. Always does. But with that being said, this method is in your hands now. Thank you for watching.